The scream was so faint, Evelyn almost missed it. But once she heard it, once that thin, terrified cry slipped through the floorboards beneath her feet, her entire body locked in place. It wasn't the cry of a spoiled child. It wasn't a tantrum. It was the sound of a child begging for his life. "Please, please, let me out." Evelyn dropped the stack of folded linens she was carrying. They spilled across the polished marble like fallen snow, but she didn't even glance at them. Her breath hitched, her heartbeat slammed against her ribs as she slowly knelt, pressing her ear to the floor. Another sob, muffled, strangled, coming from below. Her stomach lurched violently. Not again. Dear God, not a child. At 62, Evelyn Ruiz thought she had seen every kind of cruelty working in rich people's homes. She had endured insults, witnessed affairs, cleaned up after drunken rages and shattered crystal. But never, never had she heard a child cry from beneath the boards of a billionaire's mansion. Her old hands trembled as she whispered, "Sweetheart? Sweetheart, can you hear me?" A small fist thudded against wood, weak, exhausted. The sound of a child who had run out of tears, but not out of fear. Evelyn's vision blurred. She had grandchildren, 5 of them. She knew what a frightened child sounded like. She also knew what a dying one sounded like. And this cry sat chillingly between the two. She staggered to her feet, panic gripping her chest so tight she could barely breathe. For the first time in years, her legs shook uncontrollably. She called out again, louder this time. "Baby, hold on, I'm right here." Another whimper, so small, so far beneath the floor it felt like it came from under the world. This mansion, this cold, silent palace with its grand chandeliers and white marble staircases, had never felt friendly. But today, the air itself felt wrong, as if the walls were swollen with secrets too ugly to speak. And Evelyn suddenly knew the rumors were true. The billionaire's hidden son, the child no one ever saw, the child Leona, the glamorous fiancé, pretended didn't exist. Evelyn had only glimpsed him once, months ago, a tiny boy with soft curls and frightened eyes, peeking around a doorway before being yanked back by a manicured hand. Now that same boy was crying through the floor. She felt the blood drain from her face. Evelyn wasn't a hysterical woman. She wasn't dramatic. She was steady, practical, grounded. Because poor women didn't survive without being those things. But nothing in her life had prepared her for this moment. A child, buried alive, inside the home she cleaned every week. No, this can't be real. But the cries didn't stop. If anything, they grew sharper, more frantic, as if the boy sensed hope for the first time. Evelyn wiped her eyes roughly and forced herself to move. She didn't think about the consequences. She didn't think about losing her job. She didn't think about the furious, cold-eyed woman upstairs, the one who had threatened staff members for even asking where the child slept. She thought only of the voice beneath her feet, a trapped baby, alone, terrified, running out of time. "Hold on," she choked. "Grandma's coming." She hurried down the hallway, clutching the banister as she made her way toward the basement, her breath uneven, her heart hammering. Her knees ached, her back throbbed, but she barely felt it, not when a child was begging for life under the floor. Evelyn reached the basement door and froze. The padlock, Leona's new padlock, the one staff had been strictly forbidden to touch, hung open, unlocked, as if someone had been here, or planned to return. Her pulse roared in her ears. She pushed the door and descended into the dark, each step creaking below her weight. The air grew colder, damper, more suffocating with every inch downward. When she reached the bottom, she saw it, a massive antique trunk in the center of the room, bolted shut, metal bands tight across the lid. The trunk shook, not just rattled, shook violently, as if someone tiny inside was kicking with the last of their strength. Evelyn staggered forward. "Oh God, baby, I'm here! I'm here!" She grabbed the bolt with both hands, pulling, twisting, fighting it with every ounce of strength a 62-year-old body could muster. Her hands burned, her fingers slipped, her arms trembled, but she kept fighting. "Hold on," she cried, voice cracking. "I've got you!" The child whimpered again, so small, so far beneath the floor it felt like it came from under the world. Then a footstep above her. Slow, deliberate, heavy. Another, then another. Evelyn's blood turned to ice. A shadow moved across the basement ceiling. The door at the top of the stairs creaked open, and a voice, cold, venomous, dripping with the kind of hatred Evelyn had only heard in stories, slithered down the steps. "Evelyn, what exactly do you think you're doing?" Leona, the billionaire's fiancée, the woman with diamonds in her ears and cruelty in her smile, the woman who had forbidden anyone from coming near this basement. Evelyn stood slowly, turning toward the voice, her body shaking so violently she thought her knees would buckle. Behind her, the boy cried again. Leona's footsteps descended one by one. The monster was coming. And Evelyn, just one old housemaid with trembling hands, was the only thing standing between a buried child and the woman who put him there.
Evelyn knew fear. Real fear, the kind that lived in the bones of women who had worked too long, survived too much, and stayed silent for the sake of their families. Fear of losing her job, fear of losing her home, fear of ending up like the people she used to pass on the subway, wrapped in blankets and sadness. But this fear, this moment, felt different, because this time the danger wasn't aimed at her, it was aimed at a child. And something inside her rose up ancient and unshakable, the part of every grandmother that would walk barefoot through fire to protect a little one. But still, her hands trembled as Leona's heel touched the basement floor. Tap, tap, tap. Each step was slow, controlled, filled with an aristocratic confidence that came from knowing she could ruin anyone with a single phone call. "Evelyn," Leona's voice slid through the dark like a knife dipped in honey. "Why are you down here?" The woman was breathtaking, even in the dim basement light. Hair perfectly curled, makeup flawless, diamond earrings catching even the faintest glow. But no beauty could hide the cruelty in her eyes. Evelyn forced her breath to steady, forced her back to stand straight, forced her voice to meet the moment. "I heard him. I heard that child crying." Leona blinked, not in surprise, but in annoyance, as though Evelyn had commented on a smudge on the window, instead of discovering a child locked in a trunk. "Oh," she said lightly, "you mean him." She waved her manicured hand as if dismissing a spilled drink. "That's none of your concern." Evelyn's throat tightened. "He's terrified. He shouldn't be down here. He shouldn't be locked away like... Like what?" Leona interrupted, eyes narrowing. "Like the mistake that he is?" Evelyn gasped. "Mistake? He's a baby." Leona stepped closer, her heels clicking on the concrete. Her perfume, expensive, sharp, suffocating, filled the air. But no beauty could hide the cruelty in her eyes. Evelyn forced her breath to steady, forced her back to stand straight, forced her voice to meet the moment. "It was then," Evelyn said, her voice a shisper smoke. "I heard him. I heard that child crying." Leona blinked, not in surprise but in annoyance, as though Evelyn had commented on a smudge on the window, instead of discovering a child locked in a trunk. "Oh," she said lightly, "you mean him." She waved her manicured hand as if dismissing a spilled drink. "That's none of your concern." Evelyn's throat tightened. "He's terrified. He shouldn't be down here. He shouldn't be locked away like... Like what?" Leona interrupted, eyes narrowing. "Like the mistake that he is?" Evelyn gasped. "Mistake? He's a baby." Leona stepped closer, her heels clicking on the concrete. Her perfume, expensive, sharp, suffocating, filled the air. But no beauty could hide the cruelty in her eyes. Evelyn forced her breath to steady, forced her back to stand straight, forced her voice to meet the moment. "It was then," Evelyn said, her voice a shisper smoke. "I heard him. I heard that child crying." Leona blinked, not in surprise but in annoyance, as though Evelyn had commented on a smudge on the window instead of discovering a child locked in a trunk. "Oh," she said lightly, "you mean him." She waved her manicured hand as if dismissing a spilled drink. "That's none of your concern." Evelyn's throat tightened. "He's terrified. He shouldn't be down here. He shouldn't be locked away like... Like what?" Leona interrupted, eyes narrowing. "Like the mistake that he is?" Evelyn gasped. "Mistake? He's a baby." Leona stepped closer, her heels clicking on the concrete. Her perfume, expensive, sharp, suffocating, filled the air. But no beauty could hide the cruelty in her eyes. Evelyn forced her breath to steady, forced her back to stand straight, forced her voice to meet the moment. "It was then," Evelyn said, her voice a shisper smoke. "I heard him. I heard that child crying." Leona blinked, not in surprise but in annoyance, as though Evelyn had commented on a smudge on the window instead of discovering a child locked in a trunk. "Oh," she said lightly, "you mean him." She waved her manicured hand as if dismissing a spilled drink. "That's none of your concern." Evelyn's throat tightened. "He's terrified. He shouldn't be down here. He shouldn't be locked away like... Like what?" Leona interrupted, eyes narrowing. "Like the mistake that he is?" Evelyn gasped. "Mistake? He's a baby." Leona stepped closer, her heels clicking on the concrete. Her perfume, expensive, sharp, suffocating, filled the air. But no beauty could hide the cruelty in her eyes. Evelyn forced her breath to steady, forced her back to stand straight, forced her voice to meet the moment. "It was then," Evelyn said, her voice a shisper smoke. "I heard him. I heard that child crying." Leona blinked, not in surprise but in annoyance, as though Evelyn had commented on a smudge on the window instead of discovering a child locked in a trunk. "Oh," she said lightly, "you mean him." She waved her manicured hand as if dismissing a spilled drink. "That's none of your concern." Evelyn's throat tightened. "He's terrified. He shouldn't be down here. He shouldn't be locked away like... Like what?" Leona interrupted, eyes narrowing. "Like the mistake that he is?" Evelyn gasped. "Mistake? He's a baby." Leona stepped closer, her heels clicking on the concrete. Her perfume, expensive, sharp, suffocating, filled the air. But no beauty could hide the cruelty in her eyes. Evelyn forced her breath to steady, forced her back to stand straight, forced her voice to meet the moment. "It was then," Evelyn said, her voice a shisper smoke. "I heard him. I heard that child crying."
Leona blinked, not in surprise, but in annoyance, as though Evelyn had commented on a smudge on the window instead of discovering a child locked in a trunk. "Oh," she said lightly, "you mean him." She waved her manicured hand as if dismissing a spilled drink. "That's none of your concern." Evelyn's throat tightened. "He's terrified. He shouldn't be down here. He shouldn't be locked away like... Like what?" Leona interrupted, eyes narrowing. "Like the mistake that he is?" Evelyn gasped. "Mistake? He's a baby!"
Leona stepped closer, her heels clicking on the concrete. Her perfume, expensive, sharp, suffocating, filled the air. "He is not my baby," Leona hissed. "He is baggage, baggage that I will not allow to ruin my life." Behind Evelyn, the trunk thumped, a weak, desperate sound. Leona's expression tightened. "He's supposed to be asleep. I gave him something for that." Her eyes slid toward the trunk with cold irritation. Sleep. Gave him something. The words made Evelyn's stomach roll. "What did you do to him?" Evelyn whispered. Leona smiled, a slow, chilling smile that had no warmth, only calculation. "What I had to, because that boy is a threat to everything I've built, my future, my marriage, my financial security." Evelyn felt anger burn in her chest, stronger than fear, stronger than shock, stronger than the trembling in her legs. "That child is your fiancé's son. He's an inconvenience, and I am fixing that, permanently." Evelyn felt the world tilt. Permanently. Not just hidden, not just locked away. Something far darker. Her breath became a thin, shaky thread. You can't mean..." "Oh, I mean exactly what you think I mean." The basement suddenly felt too small, too cold, too heavy with danger. Evelyn backed up instinctively, placing herself between Leona and the trunk. Leona let out a soft, mocking laugh. "That's adorable," she said. "Do you think you can stop me? You're a maid, Evelyn, a 62-year-old maid with arthritis and a rental apartment. I own this house. I own your paycheck. And if you make one wrong move..." She stepped closer. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I will make sure you never work again." Evelyn swallowed. "I don't care about my job," she said, voice cracking. "I care about that child." Leona rolled her eyes. "Yes, well, you caring people are exactly why poor folks stay poor, always trying to save everyone except yourselves." Evelyn didn't speak, couldn't speak. Her heart hammered as she felt the trunk behind her shake again, the child reacting to the voices, to the tension, to the rising danger. Leona's eyes flicked toward it. "She needs to be quiet," she muttered. She took a step forward. Evelyn stepped in front of her, palms out. "You're not touching him." Leona stopped. Then she laughed, a bright, sharp, deranged sound that didn't match her beautiful face at all. "You? Stopping me?" She laughed harder. "You must be out of your mind." She reached inside her coat pocket. Evelyn's breath caught. She didn't know what Leona was reaching for, but she instinctively stepped back, shielding the trunk even more. Leona pulled out a small silver key, the key to the trunk's lock. She held it up between two fingers. "This key," she said softly, "determines whether that problem stays contained or becomes something much worse." Evelyn felt her knees weaken. "Give it to me." "Oh, no. No, no, no. You don't get to demand anything." She leaned in, eyes glittering with a sick pleasure. "Do you want to know where I was planning to move him tonight?" Evelyn's heartbeat stopped. "Move him where?" "To the guest house. It's isolated, soundproof. No one visits, no one checks. It's the perfect place for a child who makes too much noise." Evelyn's hands curled into fists. "You're evil!" Leona shrugged. "I'm smart." She took a step closer, close enough that Evelyn could see the faint tremble of bloodlust beneath her elegance. "You can scream, you can cry, you can threaten me, but the truth is simple. No one will believe you over me. In this world, money speaks louder than maids." Evelyn felt something inside her snap. The decades of swallowing her pride, the years of being overlooked, the countless times she had been spoken down to like she was furniture, the injustice, the helplessness, and now, the life of a little boy. She straightened her back. "For the first time in your life, you're wrong." Leona's face vanished. "What did you say?" "I said you're wrong," Evelyn repeated, voice trembling but firm, "because you think no one is coming, but someone is." Leona blinked, thrown off for the first time. "I called him." Leona froze. "You called him?" Evelyn's sadness hardened into steel. "His father." A beat, a pause.
A shift in the air, like the moment before a storm splits the sky open. Leona's face drained of color. "You're lying," she breathed. Evelyn shook her head. "I called him the minute I heard his son crying." Another thump from the trunk, weak but hopeful. Leona spun toward the stairs, fury burning in her eyes. "You stupid old—" But before she could speak another word, a door slammed upstairs, heavy footsteps thundered across the marble. A man's voice roared, full of panic, rage, and heartbreak. "Where is my son?" Leona's mouth opened, her face collapsed, and Evelyn exhaled the breath she had been holding since the moment she heard that first cry. Help had arrived. But the worst, and the truth, was only beginning.
The moment the words left Maria's mouth, "Your son is alive," and she buried him, something in Alexander Hale snapped. Not broke, snapped, like a steel cable stretched past its limit. For years, people whispered that Alexander wasn't a man, but a force, a quiet storm, a billionaire who never raised his voice because he didn't need to. Power lived in his presence, not his volume. But now he was shaking. His hands trembled as if his own heartbeat was too much to hold. He steadied himself on the edge of the marble counter, fingers digging into the polished stone until his knuckles turned white. His chest tightened, breath caught somewhere between disbelief and horror. And then, his voice came out in a low, raw growl. "Tell me everything. Now." Maria had never seen him like this, not even on the days when business deals collapsed or board members betrayed him, not even during his late wife's funeral when grief carved deep lines under his eyes. But this was different. This was primal. A father hearing that someone tried to erase their child from the world. Maria swallowed hard and told him everything. The cries she'd heard under the floorboards, the shovel marks in the dirt, the tiny handprint pressed into the cold earth. Every word felt like a stab, and each stab dug a deeper, darker fury into Alexander's soul. When Maria finished, silence rolled through the room, thick, suffocating. Alexander slowly turned his head toward the grand fireplace where Eleanor was still sitting, legs crossed, expression frozen. Her wineglass had slipped from her fingers at some point, red liquid pooling like blood on the rug. Her eyes darted between Maria and Alexander, calculating, searching for a lie to cling to, a thread to spin into innocence. But there was no thread, no escape. And Alexander started walking. Slow, measured, predatory. Each footstep echoed like a countdown. Eleanor's voice trembled. "Alex, you're being misled. She's twisting—" "Don't." Just one word, sharp enough to cut the air in half. Eleanor's mouth closed instantly. Maria stepped back, her heart pounding. She wasn't scared of Alexander, but she was afraid of what a man like him might do when driven beyond the edge. Alexander stopped, right in front of Eleanor. He looked down at her, the fire casting his face in flickering shadows. His jaw clenched so tightly a muscle ticked near his ear. "Where," he asked softly, too softly, "did you put my son?" Eleanor's breath hitched. He was never your son. Alex, listen to me. I only did what was necessary to protect your reputation. A scandal like that—" "Where?" The word erupted from him like a thunderclap. Maria jumped. Even the flames in the fireplace seemed to recoil. Eleanor slid back against the couch cushions, hands trembling. "The grounds, near the old basement door. But he's not alive. He couldn't be. I made sure—" She stopped herself. Her own face went pale as she realized what she had admitted. Alexander didn't breathe, didn't blink, didn't move. A moment stretched so long it felt like the whole world was holding its breath. Then he turned to Maria. "Show me." Those two words carried grief, authority, and something far older, something elemental, a force older than power, older than wealth. A father's instinct. Maria nodded. "Yes, sir."
As they moved toward the back door, Eleanor scrambled up from the couch. "Alex, wait! You're letting a housemaid manipulate you. She has always been jealous of me. She wants to ruin us." Alexander stopped walking. He didn't turn around when he spoke. "Maria has never lied to me." A beat. "You, on the other hand, I don't even know who you are." Eleanor made a strangled sound. "You're choosing her over me? Over everything we built?" "We built nothing," he said quietly. "I built. You pretended." Then he opened the back door. Cold night air rushed into the mansion, carrying the smell of damp earth. Maria stepped outside first, leading the way across the stone patio, gripping her flashlight tight. The ground stretched in every direction. Gardens, courtyards, old storage rooms. But she remembered exactly where the sound came from. As they walked, Alexander's steps faltered. He wasn't the composed billionaire anymore. He was just a father, terrified to find out if he was already too late. Maria pointed toward a small wooden door leading to the unused basement kitchen. "There," she whispered. That door had always been strange, old, warped, rarely opened. Most staff avoided it because it creaked like a thing alive. But tonight, it creaked with purpose. Alexander pushed it open. A damp draft swept up from the dark stairwell. Maria swallowed. "It was here, right here. I heard him cry through the floor." Alexander descended the steps so fast, Maria had to grab the railing to keep up. In the basement, dust hung thick in the air, caught in the beam of the flashlight. And then, the beam hit something. Dirt. Freshly disturbed earth. Alexander froze. His face drained of color. Maria's lungs squeezed tight. There was a small indentation in the soil. The shape unmistakable. A tiny handprint. Alexander fell to his knees. Not collapsed, not weak, driven by something deeper. He scooped at the dirt with his bare hands. Soil filled his nails, coated his skin, streaked his sleeves. Maria dropped beside him, digging too. Neither spoke, both breathed in sharp, ragged bursts. And then, Maria heard it. Faint, muffled, but real. A sound so soft it could have almost been imagination. A whimper. Alexander's head snapped up. His eyes widened, raw and wet with disbelief. Again, a tiny breath, a tiny cry. Alexander let out a sound that wasn't quite a sob and wasn't quite a laugh, a sound born of shock, agony, and overwhelming relief. He dug faster, harder, feverishly. And when his fingers brushed something soft, cloth, he screamed for Maria to help pull. Together they lifted a dirt-covered blanket bundle from the shallow grave, brushing soil from the baby's face. The baby blinked. He was alive, weak, cold, but breathing. Alexander's entire body shuddered. He pressed the baby to his chest, holding him with a gentleness that contrasted violently with the fury burning in his eyes. He whispered, voice breaking, "Daddy's here. Daddy's here. I've got you. I've got you now." Maria felt tears spill from her own eyes. This wasn't just relief. This was divine justice unfolding right in front of them. And behind them, at the top of the stairs, they heard footsteps. Slow, uneven. Eleanor. She appeared in the doorway, silhouette trembling. "What have you done?" Alexander said, clutching his son. His voice was low, shaking with contained rage. Eleanor looked at the baby, then at Alexander, then at Maria. Her face twisted. Ugly, desperate, unhinged. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," she whispered.
Alexander stood, holding his son close, his eyes burning like molten steel. "Oh, Eleanor," he said, voice cold enough to freeze bone, "this is only the beginning."
The police cars lit up the Hale estate like a silent red and blue storm. They lined the long driveway in perfect rows, engines humming, radios crackling, shadows of officers moving across the manicured lawns. The world outside was waking up, but inside Alexander Hale's mansion, time had already split into two pieces. Before the truth, and after. Maria stood near the great room windows, hands trembling as she watched officers move with the kind of careful urgency reserved for only the most horrifying cases. While they worked, the entire estate seemed to hold its breath, as if even the walls were listening. Behind her, Alexander cradled his son on the leather sofa, warming him under a blanket the paramedics had provided. They checked the baby again and again, unable to believe what they were seeing. The child had survived being buried alive. It was a miracle. A fragile, impossible miracle. And Alexander looked like a man balancing on the very edge of sanity. His business suit and the reputation that usually shielded him like armor lay forgotten. Dirt streaked his shirt, his hair was disheveled, and his eyes were something feral. Maria could feel the rage radiating off him like heat. A detective approached cautiously, notebook in hand. "Mr. Hale, we need you to go through the sequence of events, starting from when your housemaid heard the—" "She's not my housemaid tonight," Alexander snapped, without looking up. "She's the reason my son is breathing." Maria swallowed hard. It wasn't praise, it was the truth, but hearing him say it made her eyes sting. The detective nodded respectfully and addressed Maria directly. "Miss Alvarez, we'll take your full recorded statement once the scene is processed. For now, just stay close." Maria nodded. Then the room grew quiet again. Too quiet. Because upstairs, in the hallway outside the sitting room, Eleanor Hale cuffed her wrists behind her back. Eleanor, perfect, polished Eleanor, stood rigid with shock, her hair disheveled, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Hours ago, she had been sipping expensive wine in a silk robe. Now she wore a thick gray blanket draped around her shoulders, hands bound, face pale as marble. "Alexander!" she shrieked as officers escorted her down the staircase. "This is insane! You can't let them do this to me!" She thrashed, her voice wild and sharp enough to scrape paint off the walls. "I did what I had to do! You don't understand! That child—" Alexander stood. He rose, slowly, deliberately, like a volcano deciding whether to erupt or destroy everything. The detective moved between them, but Alexander didn't lunge. His restraint wasn't mercy, it was calculation, a different kind of fury. He spoke in a tone Maria had never heard from him, not raised, not frantic, but hollow, broken, a tone that carried years of betrayal in every syllable. "Eleanor," he said, "I don't want to hear one more word from you." She froze. Alexander stepped forward just enough for her to see the child, resting in his arms, wrapped and breathing softly. "This is my son," he said, his voice suddenly shaking. "My flesh, my blood, and you left him to die because he wasn't convenient for you?"
Eleanor's lips parted in a trembling gasp. "He shouldn't even exist! That woman—" "What woman?" the detective cut in sharply. "You'd better choose your next words carefully." Eleanor realized too late she'd exposed even more. She stumbled backward, eyes darting wildly. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. I was trying to protect him, protect us. That child, he was a threat." Alexander surged forward, but two officers held him back. "This is what you were going to marry?" Maria whispered, her voice low, dripping with the kind of sorrow only someone with a conscience could feel. "A man who loved you, trusted you, and you buried his son alive?" Eleanor's face twisted with an ugly snarl. "You don't know anything about this family." Maria stepped toward her, small, worn from years of work, but standing taller than Eleanor had ever seemed. "I know this," Maria said quietly. "A family is built on love, and you don't have an ounce of it." Eleanor spat at her feet, but the spit didn't land on Maria's shoes. It landed on her own chin, because her hands were cuffed and she had no control left. The humiliation hit her like a slap. She screamed, high, bitter, feral, but the officers dragged her toward the waiting car. Her voice trailed into the night. "Alexander, I did it for you! I did it for us! I loved you! I loved you!" Her cries echoed down the long driveway until the cruiser door slammed shut, cutting her off mid-rant. Silence rushed in. A deep, aching silence. Maria exhaled shakily. Alexander sank back onto the sofa, clutching his child like the world might rip him away again. An officer approached him cautiously. "Mr. Hale, Child Protective Services needs to do a mandatory interview and will need you to answer some questions about the mother." "She's dead," Alexander said before the officer finished. The room froze. Maria's head whipped toward him. The detective looked up sharply. "The mother is deceased?" Alexander nodded slowly, eyes distant. "She passed away during childbirth. Complications. I didn't even know about the baby until weeks later. Eleanor found out before I did." A heavy, suffocating wave of understanding washed over everyone. Maria felt a chill run down her spine. Eleanor had not simply buried a child. She had buried the last piece of a woman Alexander once loved, deeply. The last piece of someone gone too soon. The detective's jaw tightened. "We'll also need to exhume the burial site for evidence." Alexander's voice cracked. "It's not a burial site. It's a crime scene." He looked down at his son. Just a baby. Just a tiny, breathing miracle. He brushed the child's cheek with a trembling finger. "My boy. My beautiful boy." Maria couldn't hold back her tears anymore. She turned away, covering her mouth with both hands. Because she understood. This moment wasn't just about survival. It was about truth. It was about justice. It was about a father reclaiming a child he didn't even know he'd almost lost forever. The detective cleared his throat gently. "Mr. Hale, what would you like us to tell the press? Because I assure you, they're already outside the gates." Alexander inhaled slowly, deeply, purposefully. The rage in him had not cooled. It had simply become sharper, more focused. He stood again, this time with a steadiness that sent a ripple through the room. He said, "Tell them that a crime was committed against my son." A pause. "And that every lie, every person involved in it, will be exposed." The detective nodded. Maria whispered, "Sir, exposing this publicly, are you sure it will be everywhere?" Alexander turned to her, and for the first time since the ordeal began, his eyes softened, just slightly, as he looked at her. "Maria," he said quietly, "the world needs to know what was done to him, and no one will ever hide my son again." The words hung in the air like prophecy, and outside, beyond the gates, the first camera flashes began to light up the night, because the world was about to learn everything, and Alexander Hale was done being quiet.
By the next morning, the Hale estate was no longer a home. It was a battleground. Reporters crowded at the gates. Helicopters hovered above the property, their shadows sweeping across the lawn. News vans lined the road for half a mile, engines idling as journalists rehearsed their lines. A billionaire's fiancé accused of burying his infant child alive. The housemaid who saved the baby's life. A scandal shaking one of America's most influential families. The story was already viral before dawn. But inside the mansion, the mood was nothing like the frenzy outside. It was quiet. Too quiet. Heavy with exhaustion, fear, and something else simmering beneath the surface. A hunger for justice. Maria stood in the kitchen, staring at the cup of tea she'd made but couldn't bring herself to drink. Her hands were still trembling from the night before. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the dirt-covered box, the tiny hand, the stillness that almost wasn't broken. She heard footsteps behind her. Alexander. She didn't need to turn, she could feel him in the doorway. A presence heavy with the weight of a father who hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, but couldn't break. Not yet. "Maria," he said softly. She turned, and for the first time she saw the vulnerability in his eyes. Not the fire, not the rage, but the fear. The raw human fear that he could have lost his child forever. How is he?" she whispered. Alexander exhaled, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Stable. The doctor says the cold slowed everything down, kept him alive longer than he should have been." Tears filled Maria's eyes again. "God was with him." "And you were," Alexander said. "If you hadn't heard him—" Maria shook her head. "Please, sir, don't tell me what might have happened." Because she knew. Because the images would never leave her. Alexander moved closer, lowering his voice. They're bringing in social services for a statement soon, and detectives want to follow up on Eleanor's past behavior. Apparently, this wasn't the first sign something was deeply wrong. A shiver crawled up Maria's spine. "You think she planned this for a long time?" Alexander let out a harsh breath. "She knew the baby existed 2 weeks before I did. She intercepted the lawyer's letter. She handled all the estate paperwork. She even hired a private investigator to confirm things before I ever saw the proof." Maria covered her mouth in horror. "She didn't just react. She organized it." He nodded grimly. "Every minute I thought she was stressed or overwhelmed, she was planning to erase my son." Maria gripped the counter to steady herself. "Sir, the media will tear this apart." "That's why we're not hiding. Anymore." But the media storm didn't wait for permission. By noon, every major outlet had already run some version of the story. Harris Eleanor Gray Hale arrested for attempted infanticide. Billionaire's housemaid saved the baby's life that was buried alive. Shocking abuse in America's wealthiest homes. The secret child the Hale dynasty didn't want. Conspiracy threads exploded online. Talk shows speculated wildly. Family friends distanced themselves. Business partners panicked. But all that noise faded when the police department held its first press conference. Alexander arrived with purpose. He didn't hide behind tinted windows or PR handlers. He stepped out of the black SUV with his sleeves rolled, his jaw set, and Maria walking behind him like someone standing at the center of the truth. The microphones exploded with questions. "Mr. Hale, did Eleanor really bury your child alive? Is your son safe now? Why was the crime covered up for hours? Who found the baby? Are you pressing charges? Did you know about the child before last night?" Alexander raised a hand. Silence fell. His voice was steady, but the pain underneath dragged at each word. "Last night, a horrific crime was committed against my son. Someone I trusted, someone I planned to marry, attempted to end his life." He paused. Cameras clicked in a violent storm. "I will not comment on her motives. That is for investigators and the courts to determine. But I will say this." He looked to Maria. Maria stiffened, heart pounding. "My son is alive today because of one woman, a woman who heard what no one else did, a woman who dug through dirt with her bare hands to save him." Dozens of flashes burst at once. "Maria Alvarez is a hero," Alexander said, voice thickening. "And she has my eternal gratitude." Maria lowered her gaze, overwhelmed. Then Alexander continued, his tone turning colder, sharper, like steel being drawn. "To anyone involved in covering this up, to anyone who knew and kept quiet, to anyone who coordinated, assisted, or enabled this violence, know this." He leaned in slightly, and the camera zoomed tight. "We are coming for you. You will not hide behind power. You will not hide behind money. You will not hide behind my name." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "And as for my son," added,
He will never again be a secret or an inconvenience or a target. A reporter shouted, "Mr. Hale, will you pursue full charges, attempted murder, conspiracy?" Alexander's jaw locked. "I will pursue everything," he said simply. Inside the station, detectives had already begun the deeper investigation. Maria sat in the interview room, hands folded, voice trembling, as she recounted every detail from the knock she heard to the moment Alexander broke down with his son in his arms. Detective Reeves watched her carefully. What made you dig? Most people wouldn't have trusted their ears at that hour. Maria looked at her hands. "I'm a mother. I know the sound of a child crying, even if it's faint, even if the world wants you to ignore it." Reeves softened. "Well, you saved him." Maria blinked hard to keep from crying. Reeves flipped a page. "One more thing. Did you ever witness Miss Gray mistreating the baby before this?" "No. She kept the baby hidden. I never saw him, never even knew he was here." Reeves exchanged a long look with her partner. "That's what every staff member said. No one ever saw the boy until he was buried." Maria swallowed. Then she really was planning this. "We believe she had help." Maria's blood ran cold. "Help?" she echoed. Reeves nodded. "We've already identified 2 individuals, a private doctor who falsified some paperwork, and a member of the estate staff who may have known the baby was moved last night." Maria felt her breath hitch. The betrayal felt larger, wider, like a shadow that had covered more than just one evil woman. "How far does this go?" she whispered. Reeves shook his head slowly. "We're still digging." Back at the estate, Alexander finally held his son in a quiet nursery that had been locked for months, untouched, abandoned, waiting for a child that Eleanor never intended to let live. He sat in the rocking chair, the baby warm against his chest, breathing softly. For the first time since the ordeal began, Alexander cried. Not rage, not fury, not vengeance, but grief and gratitude, and the kind of fierce, unstoppable love only a father discovering his child can feel. Maria watched from the doorway, her heart clenching. Because justice was coming, but healing had just begun, and something told her this story was far from over.
Detective Reeves had been in law enforcement long enough to know one thing. Evil this calculated never works alone. And Eleanor Gray Hale hadn't just committed a crime, she architected a conspiracy. By the next morning, the investigation had already cracked open a secret web of lies that stretched farther and deeper than anyone expected. But for Maria, the first sign came quietly. She was sitting in a waiting room at the precinct, hands folded, staring at the floor, trying to steady her breathing. The walls buzzed with chatter from reporters and officers passing by. Every now and then someone would whisper her name. "That's the maid. That's the one who saved the baby. She's going to be all over the news." She could only shrink in her chair and pray none of the cameras came through the double doors. She didn't want glory. She wanted the baby safe, and she wanted the truth known. But the truth she was about to learn went far beyond what she imagined. Reeves stepped out of his office, holding a stack of manila folders, each one thicker than the last. "Maria," he said, "I need to show you something." Her heart lurched. "Is it about the baby?" "No," Reeves replied. "It's about Eleanor." He motioned for her to follow him into a nearby briefing room, where his partner, Detective Mills, was already arranging documents on a wide metal table. Maria hesitated. "Do I need to be here for all this?" Reeves nodded. "You're the one who saw Eleanor last. You're the one who found the child, and some of this involves the staff, people you worked with." Her stomach tightened.
Please sit. Maria lowered herself slowly, bracing for whatever came next. Reeves opened the first folder. Maria, Eleanor didn't just snap last night. This wasn't a moment of panic or anger. He slid a page toward her. It was an invoice for a custom-built wooden box. Not a storage box, not a packing crate, a vented, insulated container. Maria's breath caught. Oh my God. Mills spoke up, voice grave. This wasn't improvisation. She ordered this 4 weeks ago. Maria pressed her hand to her mouth. She planned it, she whispered. All of it? And that's not the worst part, Reeves said. He opened the second folder, revealing bank statements showing transfers to a private investigator. Another folder contained call logs between Eleanor and a medical provider. Another held emails with estate security personnel. But none of it prepared Maria for the next page. A photograph. She blinked, confused. Then the room spun. It was a picture of the baby, a newborn, lying in a hospital bassinet. Not from yesterday, not from last night. It was dated 2 months earlier. Detective, her voice trembled, I thought he was only born a week ago. Reeves shook his head. No, Maria. He was born early. He spent 3 weeks in neonatal care. Maria grabbed the edge of the table, dizzy. She told the entire estate staff she was traveling for business, but she wasn't. She was hiding the birth. Mills added, hiding it and preparing for something much worse. Reeves laid down yet another document. This time, Maria didn't gasp. She didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She froze. It was a signed order, a forged order, requesting that the hospital release the child into Eleanor's private care without notifying the father. Is this legal? Maria said, voice thin. No, Reeves said sharply. This is kidnapping on paper. Maria's chest tightened. But why? Why do all this? Why not just tell Alexander? He would have taken the child, loved him. Mills replied first, bluntly. Because Eleanor wanted Alexander's money, not his son. Reeves continued. A child born outside the engagement to another woman that threatens inheritance, threatens public image, threatens access to the Hale fortune. Maria's eyes widened. So she tried to erase the child to protect her position? Reeves nodded. And she had help. He opened the next folder. Inside were photos of 3 people Maria knew well. Mrs. Darnell, the head housekeeper, Dr. Callum, Eleanor's private physician, and Jonah Pierce, the estate security manager. Maria's pulse spiked. Wait, Jonah? But he's always been kind. He checks in on us. Reeves slid over a printed text message exchange. Her heart dropped. It was Jonah. Hold the staff away from the West Garden around 10 p.m. She needs complete privacy. Make sure the cameras cycle offline. If the maid asks questions, tell her it's construction. Maria felt her stomach twist into a knot. I asked about the noise outside. He said it was sprinklers. Reeves nodded grimly. He lied. Maria swallowed hard. Mrs. Darnell? What did she do? Reeves turned another page. She delivered cash from Eleanor to the private investigator. She also instructed staff not to enter the East Wing for 2 days, claiming Eleanor needed space. No, she wouldn't. Knowingly. She knew, Reeves interrupted gently, that a baby was in that wing. The betrayal knifed deep. People she'd trusted, people she'd laughed with, cried with, worked beside. People who stood by and let a child be buried alive. Detective, Maria whispered, what happens now? Mills stepped closer. Now, we build a case. A public, airtight case. Not just against Eleanor, but every person who enabled her. Reeves added, voice firm, they don't get to walk away. Not this time. Not with money, not with influence, not with connections. Maria exhaled shakily. And Alexander? She asked softly. Does he know?
He exchanged a heavy look with Mills. He knows Eleanor didn't act alone, but he doesn't know how far it goes yet. Maria hesitated. How will you tell him? Reeves leaned back in his chair. I won't. Maria blinked. You won't? Reeves shook his head. You will. Maria's heart hammered. She wasn't prepared for this. She wasn't ready to shatter a man already barely holding together. But she nodded. I'll tell him. When Maria returned to the estate that afternoon, the house felt colder than ever. Alexander was upstairs with his son. The door to the nursery was cracked open just a little bit. She could hear him humming a soft, broken tune to the baby. Maria hesitated, then knocked. Alexander turned, exhaustion etched in every line of his face. Maria, she whispered, the detectives, they found things. He stiffened. What things? Maria swallowed, trembling. Things about Eleanor, things about the staff, and things about your son. His face hardened. Tell me. And she did. Every document, every lie, every betrayal, every person who knew and stayed silent, every person who helped Eleanor hide the baby, every step leading to the moment Maria dug through dirt to pull that same child back into life. By the time she finished, Alexander's hands were trembling so violently he had to set the baby back into his crib. Maria reached toward him, but he stepped back, tears filling his eyes. I trusted these people, he whispered. I let her... His voice broke. He pressed both hands against the crib railing, breathing like a man who had been stabbed. Maria, he whispered, they don't just try to kill my son. They used me, played me, lied to me. They stood in my house, smiled in my face, while planning my child's death. Maria reached out again. This time he didn't pull away. They will all pay, he whispered, voice turning dark, low, final. Maria nodded softly. Yes, sir, they will. And she believed it. For the first time since this nightmare began, justice wasn't just coming, it was inevitable.
Richard Gray had built his empire like a fortress. Money poured into stone walls, lawyers, privacy gates, and a public image polished so bright it almost blinded people into believing it. For years, people whispered that nothing could touch him. Not scandal, not rumor, not even truth. But that morning, when the sun crept over the hills of Westchester and spread gold over the Gray estate, it illuminated something the world had never seen before. Cracks. Cracks in the walls, cracks in the name, cracks in the man. A storm was coming, and it wasn't one the Gray family could buy its way out of. The house that could no longer hide anything. The estate, once a towering symbol of wealth and power, now felt hollow. Even the staff sensed it. The gardeners, who used to whistle as they trimmed hedges, now kept their heads down. The cooks whispered in corners. The security team walked a little slower, unsure of who they were protecting or from what. Richard stood in the foyer staring at a portrait of his father, a stern man in a military suit, jaw rigid, eyes cold. We are Grays, his father had always said. We don't fall, we make others fall. But today, Richard felt like the floor itself was slipping from under his feet. It wasn't the media leaks. It wasn't the shareholders demanding answers. It wasn't even the quiet panic messages from the board. No. It was the knowledge that everything he built, every decision he made, every person he trusted, had led him here. And the woman he trusted most, the woman he planned to marry, had buried his son. Buried his son. That truth echoed through his home like a scream no one could silence. Elizabeth's panic. Upstairs, Elizabeth was unraveling. The woman who once controlled rooms with a single lifted eyebrow now paced in frantic circles, her hair disheveled, her breath shallow, her expensive mascara smeared beneath her eyes, turning her face into a ghost of the polished beauty Richard once admired. She had always believed she was untouchable. Money protected her. Status elevated her. Image shielded her. But the world was shifting, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't the one holding the leash. She was the one being dragged.
On her vanity, her phone buzzed non-stop. "We need a statement. This is spiraling. Delete your socials, now! The press is outside. They know." Her hands shook so hard she could barely tap the screen. She had controlled everyone, Richard, the household staff, the narrative, the image, but she couldn't control what Anna found. She couldn't control what the detectives discovered. She couldn't control the truth anymore. She tried to breathe. She couldn't. The walls felt too close, the windows too bright, the air too thin. "Elizabeth." She froze. Richard stood in the doorway. But he wasn't angry. He was hollow. And somehow, that was worse. Richard's breaking point. "Why?" he asked quietly. The question hung between them like a blade. Elizabeth swallowed hard. "Richard, I panicked. No, not the story, not the excuses. I want the truth." His voice cracked. "I want to know why you buried my son instead of calling for help." Elizabeth's face twisted. Something ugly surfaced. Something real. "He wasn't supposed to exist," she hissed. Richard's stomach dropped. "He wasn't part of the plan, Richard. I spent years fighting to build the perfect life, the perfect marriage, the perfect future. I wasn't going to let a mistake, your mistake, ruin everything." Richard staggered back. "And the child's mother?" he whispered. "What would you have done if Anna hadn't found him?" Elizabeth's expression hardened. She should never have been hired. She knew too much. She ruined everything. There it was. The truth. Not an accident. Not fear. Not panic. Control. Possession. Self-preservation. All at the cost of a child's life. Richard felt his hand grip the banister to steady himself. "You buried my son because he didn't fit the world you wanted," he said, voice shaking with grief that made his bones ache. Elizabeth crossed her arms. "It threatened the world I deserved." Richard stared at her for a long, silent, suffocating moment. Then he said the words she never expected. "You don't deserve anything here." The news broke. By noon, every major news outlet in the country carried the story. Billionaire heir found alive after alleged cover-up. Insider claims fiancé hides child to protect status. Maid discovers buried infant on private estate. Helicopters hovered over the gray property. Reporters crowded the gates. Lawyers scrambled like ants under an overturned rock. America loves a scandal, but it loves a downfall much more, especially one wrapped in greed, lies, betrayal, and an innocent child. The court of public opinion came first, and it came fast. Anna's protection. While chaos devoured the estate, Anna sat quietly in a secure room at the police station, a blanket over her shoulders. A detective offered her tea. Another officer checked on the baby, who slept peacefully in a small bassinet. Everyone treated her gently. Everyone thanked her, because she was the kind of person people recognized instantly. The good one, the honest one, the brave one, the kind of woman who did the right thing, even when she could have lost everything. She didn't know what would happen next, to her job, to Richard, to the baby, to herself. But for the first time since stepping foot into the Gray Mansion, she felt safe. And that was enough for now. The Gray Empire crumbles. Board members gathered in emergency meetings, stockholders demanded leadership changes, sponsors threatened withdrawal. Investigators combed through financials, staff files, past incidents. Richard realized the truth. His empire survived scandal. It survived lawsuits. It survived competition. But it could not survive this. The house he'd worked his entire life to build, a house of wealth, a house of legacy, a house of power, was collapsing under its own rot. And none of it mattered. Not compared to the child sleeping in the next room. Not compared to the woman who rescued him. Not compared to the truth he'd ignored for too long. Power meant nothing if you couldn't protect the vulnerable. The end of Elizabeth's reign. Police escorted Elizabeth out the back doors. Paparazzi still found her. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted. Her perfect life was gone. Her perfect image shattered. Her perfect control destroyed.
No amount of money could silence the truth now. She screamed, denied, threatened, but it didn't matter. She wasn't the ice queen of the Gray estate anymore. She was a criminal in handcuffs, a fallen fiancé, a disgraced socialite, a woman undone by her own cruelty. And as the police car drove away, she caught one last glimpse of the estate through the tinted window, a place she thought she would own. Now, it would stand as the monument of her downfall. And in the quiet, a new beginning. Richard stood alone in the nursery, a room he barely remembered approving, a room he never expected to use. But now it was filled with soft light, warm air, and the steady breath of the sun he kept almost losing. He touched the crib gently. "I'm here. I won't fail you again." Behind him, the house groaned as if exhaling years of secrets. The Gray Empire fell, but something better, something honest, was rising in its place.
The courtroom was silent in a way that felt sacred. Not quiet, sacred. Every seat was filled. Reporters squeezed into the aisles. Retirees from the nearby community center came early with coffee to watch that Billionaire case unfold. Mothers sat with arms folded, jaws tight. Older men leaned forward with narrowed eyes, and somewhere in the second row, a church group whispered prayers under their breath. People didn't come here for gossip or spectacle. They came for justice. Justice for a baby who never asked to be buried. Justice for a maid who risked everything. Justice for every decent person who'd been stepped on by someone with money and no conscience. When Elizabeth Gray, once the diamond of high society, was led in wearing handcuffs, the room didn't gasp. It simply hardened. The testimony that broke the room. Anna sat in the witness chair, hands trembling only slightly, though she held her spine straight as a fence post. She wasn't dressed in her uniform today. No apron, no cleaning shoes, just a simple pressed blouse. But her humility followed her everywhere. It was woven into her heartbeat. The prosecutor nodded gently. "Miss Santos, please tell the court what you saw." Anna swallowed, and then she spoke. She told them about the baby's faint whimpers, the soil still fresh, the tiny bundle buried under leaves, the shock, the terror, the desperate digging with her bare hands. She told them about Elizabeth's cruelty, how she'd mocked the child, her eyes cold as winter. She told them about fear, working under a woman who could smile like an angel and act like a devil. But the moment that broke the room open, the moment that made even the judge blink slowly, was when Anna said quietly, "I thought he was dead, and I prayed. I prayed that if he was alive, God would guide my hands. And he did." Several older women dabbed tears from their eyes. A man in the back whispered, "Bless her." Even the prosecutor paused to steady himself. Anna had no wealth, no connections, no protection, and yet she had something far greater.
Elizabeth's lawyer tried everything: medical angles, emotional instability, even stress-induced confusion, but the evidence was overwhelming. Her digital messages were damning. The nanny cam footage was damning. Even the groundskeeper's testimony, shaking, voice thin, was damning. But Elizabeth's own words, recorded on Richard's security system, sealed her fate. "He wasn't supposed to exist. He wasn't part of my future. He was a mistake." The jury flinched hearing it. A woman in the front whispered, "Lord have mercy." Elizabeth, once a beauty sculpted by privilege, now looked brittle. Her eyes held no softness, no regret, only the fear of losing control. She glared at Anna with a hatred that could have burned glass. But Anna didn't look away. She had survived worse than a glare. She had saved a life. Richard takes the stand. When Richard Gray walked to the witness box, the room shifted. Wealth usually commanded attention. Today, it earned none. People weren't looking at a billionaire. They were looking at a father. A grieving, broken, rebuilding father. His tie was crooked, his eyes red, his voice quiet but steady. "I failed my son," he said.
I failed to see the danger in my own home. I failed to forgive myself for a mistake I didn't know how to face. But Anna, she saved him. She saved me too." He paused, breathing shakily. And Elizabeth didn't bury him out of confusion. She buried him to erase him, because she loved power more than she loved human life. Elizabeth snarled, "You liar!" The bailiff warned her sharply. Richard continued, "I stand here not as a businessman, not as a billionaire, just as a father. And I want justice. Not revenge. Justice." His voice cracked. "For my son, and for the woman who carried him out of the ground." Even the judge had to clear his throat before speaking. The verdict that echoed across the country. The jury deliberated for only 42 minutes. When they filed back into the courtroom, people sat forward, frozen, breath held like a single heartbeat. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendant, Elizabeth Hale, guilty. A ripple of emotion tore through the room. Some people gasped, some cried, some whispered, "Thank God." But no one cheered. It wasn't a moment for applause. It was a moment of release, a moment of truth washing over every lie. Elizabeth screamed, wild, desperate, losing the last scrap of control she'd clung to. But the officers held her firmly as she was escorted out. The door shut behind her with a sound that felt like justice slamming into place. A new kind of family. Outside the courthouse, sunlight broke through the clouds. It warmed the marble steps, the waiting crowd, and the tiny baby cradled in Anna's arms as she stepped into the afternoon air. Reporters tried to swarm, but police blocked them. Richard walked out moments later. He saw Anna, he saw his son, and then he did something that made several spectators tear up. He bowed his head to her. A billionaire bowing to a maid, not out of guilt, out of gratitude. "Anna," he said softly, "I know I can never repay what you did, but I hope you'll let me try." Anna shook her head. "I didn't do it for anything in return." "I know. That's why it means everything." He looked at the baby, wide-eyed, curious, safe. "Would you stay? Not as staff, as someone I trust, someone my son needs." Anna's breath caught. "You want me to help raise him?" Richard nodded slowly. "If you'll allow it." Anna looked down at the little boy whose tiny hand curled around her finger. "I'll stay," she whispered. "Not for money, not for gratitude, for the child who already felt like a piece of her heart." The foundation of hope. Months later, the Gray estate no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like a home. Richard closed several of his most ruthless business divisions. He donated millions to child protection services. And with Anna's help, he created the Gray Santos Foundation, dedicated to helping neglected and abused children. Older women from the community came to volunteer. Retired teachers joined literacy programs. Veterans offered mentorship. Church groups cooked meals. The estate's once cold halls now echoed with laughter, footsteps, and the soft cooing of a little boy who spent most of his day in someone's arms. Anna had her own suite, not as an employee, but as family.
And every evening she fed the baby while Richard sat beside her, reading aloud from children's books in a voice that finally softened. One night, as the fire crackled, Anna whispered, "He's lucky." Richard smiled at his son. "I'm the lucky one." Redemption, real and complete. Redemption doesn't always come wrapped in miracles. Sometimes it arrives through grief. Sometimes through truth. And sometimes, if grace is kind, it arrives through a woman with no power except the courage to do what's right. Richard rebuilt his life brick by honest brick. Anna rebuilt hers with dignity, knowing she saved not just a child, but a man who needed saving too. And somewhere in a prison cell, Elizabeth sat alone, surrounded not by a...
One evening, Anna stood outside on the balcony with the baby asleep in her arms. Fireflies drifted over the gardens. The summer air was warm. Lights glowed softly from the windows of the home that once terrified her. Richard stepped beside her, quiet, gentle, changed. "He's going to grow up knowing the truth," he said. "Not the lies my family lived in, not the fear, the truth." Anna nodded. "He'll grow up surrounded by love." Richard looked at her then, really looked at her. "Anna, you've given us our future." She smiled softly. "You saved it first." And beneath the stars, in the quiet of a redeemed home, the past finally loosened its grip. A tragedy turned into triumph. A child saved. A tyrant defeated. A family born not by blood, but by bravery. And justice, real, unshakable justice, finally had its last word.